Now let's head over to Chris Doyle, a Middle East commentator and the director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding, joining us from London. Chris, I want to get your take on these EU measures, sanctions on Israeli ministers, downgrading trade ties with Israel. Is that going to have any kind of effect?
Well, it could do if it is passed and if you get the consent of all the EU member states. And notably, of course, many people are looking at Germany and what its position would be. I think that, as ever, I'm afraid, since October 2023, what we have seen from European powers, including Britain, obviously no longer a member of the European Union, is that measures have been far too little, far too late. They've been too timid. So this is the minimal expectation from the European Union. These measures, in fact, could have been introduced years ago and should have been, given that Israel has been in consistent, flagrant violation of international law. So one has to welcome whatever steps are made in that, we want to see pressure on Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza, to stop the killing of Palestinians, men, women and children and babies, the starvation, the massive settlement building program in the West Bank. But if they are serious about doing so, if they really want to see a change on the ground, then they need to step this up. There needs to be more. There needs to be a signal that it cannot be, the same sort of relations as usual. And that Israel's largest trading partner is not going to allow them to get away with doing all of this cost-free. And the message that it sends at the moment is that the European Union is disunited, it is weak, it is not prepared to stand up for international law, rules-based order. And that is very worrying, not just for Palestinians, but actually for the future of many other issues around the planet.
But as a symbolic measure, though, regardless of whether it actually passes through all the other member states, add that to the UN Commission report yesterday, the number of countries next week that are going to recognize Palestinian statehood. Does it all add up to Israel becoming more and more isolated on the international stage?
Without question, I think that many countries are beginning to see that the global south effectively has been right, that Israel is committing a genocide. We're seeing more and more reports from differing bodies coming out that, including Israeli human rights organizations, as well as the UN Commission of Inquiry. And the fact that so many countries are now willing to recognize the state of Palestine, albeit that should never, ever be seen as a punishment or sanctioning of Israel. I think that's an indication that patience with this Israeli government, with Netanyahu, has pretty much run out. And you add into the equation the manner in which that Israel has bombed 7 states, 5 capitals in the Middle East over the last 12 months. And I think that most reasonable figures have concluded that Israel is now running amok and it is not being brought to heel by the United States, its primary patron, and that Europe needs to stand up and take some action. The trouble is, I just don't think that they are doing enough. They're not doing it fast enough, and they're not pulling along those states that are reluctant to do it because they have such abiding close relations with the state of Israel. This has got to end.
You mentioned the United States, of course. Many agree that the only one that could actually make Netanyahu change his mind would be Donald Trump. He is currently on a state visit to the UK, meeting with the British King and Keir Starmer. What's it going to take to get Donald Trump to finally say, you know what, enough is enough. Netanyahu, you need to stop?
Well, Donald Trump is not an Israel first president in that he really thinks about his own interests. And he is not wedded to Israel in the way, for example, that perhaps President Biden had been. But certainly at the moment is extremely supportive. If he starts seeing that in a cost-benefit analysis, that the United States is really losing out of this, is losing prestige, is losing influence, then he may start to recalculate it. He won't like it that the United States is giving Israel billions of dollars every single year, including in arms, and that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not actually doing as the United States wishes. So we have to work on this. And I think the European Union, if it was to stand united as Israel's largest trading partner, to remove those preferences, to end its trading agreement with Israel, if it was to sanction more and more ministers, then actually I think the European Union could wake up from being a sleeping giant to one that actually has some clout. But the trouble is that disunity, that lack of clear political will, has always been holding it back and therefore allowing the United States to be the primary player. But certainly I think the European Union could, if there is the will, make a much bigger play in what's going on in trying to bring this genocide to a full and final conclusion, because it must be stopped now.
Chris Doyle, always good to have you on the programme. Thank you.